My delight to welcome you to the University of Denver and the Cable Center here. This is an exciting moment for the University of Denver as we welcome and host the important conversation that will help define the 2020 legislative session at the Capitol, which began just this past Wednesday, January 8th. Civic engagement, civic education is an absolute core of what we do here at the University of Denver. And because this is a major election year for our country, this is going to be a very busy time for the university. And I just love to share a little bit about what we're doing to help expose our students to the wonderful opportunities of learning more about our political process and our political system. We're going to be hosting monthly events and themes throughout the year to align with the 2020 presidential election. We're going to involve our Center for American Politics, the Campus Life and Inclusive Excellence, and the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion around certain topics that we know our students are going to be really engaged around, such as redistricting and political parties and their conventions. Electoral college reform will be a topic that we've heard from students that are particularly interesting to them. This will be very multidisciplinary, very nonpartisan. We will be hosting debates that I think will bring in two different perspectives that our students will need to see. So it'll be a very balanced, bipartisan kind of approach to civic engagement. And I'm really looking forward to helping our students think about their responsibilities as citizens of our communities and our societies. I want to give a shout out to the University of Denver Estlow International Center for Journalism and New Media. This is a part of our Department of Media, Film, and Journalism Studies at the University of Denver. It's got a 20-year history where it supports excellence in journalism, and it conducts important research such as how young people in digital media environments are changing journalism. And of course, I would really like to thank Seth Maskett and the Center for American Politics. This is a center that I think is at the core of our political and civic engagement in so many different ways and was responsible for many of the events that we'll be hosting this year. Politics affects all of our lives, and the Center for American Politics encourages engagement in the political process in a very significant way. So I'm so happy to host you at the University of Denver. Thank you for joining us tonight, and now it's my delight to introduce our next speaker. He's our 43rd governor, Jared Polis, and he started since January 8th, 2019. I'm going to go off script for just a few seconds here. I happen to be the 19th chancellor, and I'm a mathematician by training. 19 is a prime number, and I'm so happy to know that Governor Polis and I share this same commonality because 43 is a prime number, and so good things are going to happen tonight. You just know that. Governor Polis has a reputation as an entrepreneur. He's a leader, a public servant, and of course a Colorado native. Like many of our DU students, Governor Polis launched his first business while he was in college. He's a proven champion of education. He's founded schools and nonprofit organizations for at-risk students, immigrants, veterans, and entrepreneurs. And prior to serving as Colorado's governor, he served on the State Board of Education where he championed higher wages for our teachers. More recently, as governor, he has delivered universal free full-day kindergarten to the state of Colorado. He's signed bills to help families save money on health care. He's made strides towards 100% renewable energy by 2040. He's cut taxes for small business, and he's invested in affordable housing and transportation. It is a true honor to welcome Governor Jared Polis to the stage.
Well, so I wish if you'd introduced me last year, I would have been 43 years old. It would have been another prime number there for you, but I'm glad that we get to share. I've never been introduced that way before, so thank you. Oh, you know what? I have a microphone here. Does this work? Am I on? Okay, let's just do this one. Thank you. I want to thank Colorado Sun, CBS4. These kinds of media partnerships are so important in making public officials accessible, interacting with the public. This kind of public forum is really precious in this day and age, and I want to thank DU as well for hosting this, and of course John Frank and Sean Boyd. Last week I gave the State of the State. They didn't give me 52 minutes here to talk to you, so I only get to talk about one idea here today, and I'm going to focus on one that's incredibly important, and that is a public option in healthcare. I was new to Congress when Congress passed the Affordable Care Act, and the Affordable Care Act made some great progress. No pricing discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions. It expanded Medicaid, which Colorado on a bipartisan basis successfully followed through on, and I want to congratulate our neighboring state of Kansas in just reaching a bipartisan framework to finally expand Medicaid in Kansas. It set up the healthcare exchanges, which provided subsidies to help people who are earning just too much to get Medicaid to be able to have some support for their health care. Did a lot of great things. One of the things that we, myself, so many others, fought for at that time in Washington was more competition in the insurance market. It was a public option. It was actually in the original House-passed bill of the Affordable Care Act. There's a long and complex legislative history. You remember it went through something called reconciliation in the Senate because they had 59 votes instead of 60. In any event, the long and the short of it is there was no cost containment through a public option that was nationally part of the Affordable Care Act. Thus, it falls to the states. We have 22 counties in Colorado that only have one insurer in the individual market and often the small group market. That doesn't, as somebody who comes from the private sector, who values the market and competition, when you have one provider, there's by definition no competition. So what is that force that can drive down rates? How do you make sure that consumers have a choice, that providers are held accountable? We need to make sure that there's a way that consumers can save money and that there's more choices, not less choices, in healthcare, and empower both people and small businesses to have those savings. Now, public option is a broad term. It could mean many different things, right? It could mean that there's some sort of state-run option. It could mean people could buy into Medicaid. It could mean people could buy into the state insurance program. What we are recommending and what legislators are talking about sponsoring is a version of a public option which doesn't put the state or any public entity in competition with the private sector. It operates and is offered by the current insurers in the marketplace, providing an additional choice for consumers and saving 9 to 18% for individuals and small businesses. Now, how does it generate those savings? It really does three things. One, it reins in the overcharging that hospitals are doing. And let me say, I think we're hitting close to the mark because some of the hospitals and pharmaceutical companies sent out a mailer against the public option. This is it here, before it even got sent. So that's real exciting to me that we must be getting something right if they're that worried about it. But it also adds insult to injury to those of us who are consumers of medical services. I assume that's all of us in this room, to know that they're using some of that money from overcharging people to lobby against reforms that would save people money. That is rubbing salt in the wound, so to speak. So that's what it does, number one. Number two, it makes sure that the refunds from the pharmaceutical companies are actually deployed to reduce premiums rather than being intercepted by intermediaries along the way. There's a whole chain of intermediaries between the pharmaceutical company and the consumer. Refunds have become a big part of it from the pharmaceutical company. We can't fix the whole pharmaceutical pricing model with this. Separately, we're doing importation of prescription drugs from Canada. We're working on other things that can save people money. But in this continuum of an insurance product, we want to make sure that those refunds from the prescription drugs go to have lower premiums for people. And then third, it looks at something called the medical loss ratio. What that means is this is on the insurer side. It basically tells insurers, hey, look, here's the good news on the public option. We're not cutting you out. The state's not going into competition with you. There's not something that's going to hurt insurance. It's going to be offered through you. Here's the other news. You're not going to make more money off the backs of individuals and small businesses than you make off your big customers, your 1,000-person, 10,000-person customers. Basically, when an insurer in a large group provides insurance for a 1,000-person company, a 500-person company, a 10,000-person company, they are allowed to retain 15% for administration and overhead and profits, right? They are allowed to currently have 20% of margin from the individual and small group market. We're just saying give individuals and small businesses the same deal you give businesses over 100 people today. 15% should cover your overhead and your profit margin. So through those three mechanisms, the public option would on average save 9 to 18% and really interject some needed choice in the system that will help more people who lack coverage today get coverage, and also drive down rates across the board by providing downward pricing pressure that will also save people in the large group market money on their health care. One of the reasons that the hospitals that overcharge and other insurers are so vociferously against this is they know that it provides a downward pressure on rates. And when large groups are coming in negotiating, they can say, why am I paying more than the small group? And those rates will be public and transparent, and they'll be done in a way that takes into account the disparities in our healthcare system. So this is something that should have been done a long time ago. So sometimes what's old is new. Our Congress failed to include this mechanism to promote competition in the Affordable Care Act, although it was in the original House-passed version. We're now very excited that Colorado and several other states are looking at some incarnation of a model of injecting needed competition, accountability, transparency, and savings into healthcare. Because one thing that I think unites us is no matter where I am in this debate, no matter who I hear from, Republicans, Independents, Democrats, I have yet to meet a single voter that says, I don't pay enough for my health care. It's a problem for businesses, for individuals, and it has, by the way, in some cases there's tragedies, right, where people lose their home, their savings are completely wiped out over an illness. During my State of the State, we highlighted the success of their bipartisan reinsurance program, which many of our legislators here today supported, which saved an average of over 20% in the individual market. It didn't help the small group market like the public option would, but it helped the individual market. And that we highlighted a single father a widower, lost his wife several years ago to cancer from Summit County with 3 young daughters, who's saving $7,000 on his health care insurance this year, and the transformative effect that has on his livelihood. So we think that employers like the Colorado Sun, which I understand has 30 or 40 people, ought to get the same deal from insurers as big businesses like DU. So thank you all, and look forward to the discussion. Is this me? Okay.
Governor Polis, thank you for joining us. And let me also introduce our panel of moderators. We have Sean Boyd from CBS4 and Seth Maskett from the Center on American Politics. We're going to sit down here and have a little fireside chat of sorts, or green cube chat, we'll call it, about this idea here. Let me start out with this. Governor, you've supported Medicare for all while you were in Washington as a congressman, and now you think public option is the way to go. Can you talk about how you came to that transformation and why public option is best for Colorado?
Well, those are two different things. So when you're talking about anything like offering people to buy into Medicare or having a basic level of benefits for everybody nationally, that's a national program. There's a lot we could do better with our national programs, and there's 3 main ones. Medicare, that's federally administered. Medicaid, which is federally funded, state administered, subject to a complex set of rules. And then the third is the VA system. So that one is directly run. That's kind of the socialized medicine piece. That's actually the government running hospitals and doctors. The other 2 are payers. It's the smallest. The VA is the smallest. When you look at what we should do nationally, that's an exciting discussion. There's a lot we should do. Number 1, Medicare should be able to negotiate for prescription drug rates. Right now, they pay full price. So get this is crazy. The other federal payer, the VA, they're allowed to negotiate for prescription drugs. So you literally have the VA paying like 30 or 40% less for the exact same prescription drugs as Medicare reimburses. So it's absolutely ridiculous, but we're talking about state. So that's what I'm doing now. I was frustrated for 10 years on that other stuff. So I'm really glad to come back to Colorado. And here, the public option is a tremendous opportunity. We are, of course, glad that the federal payers exist. They're part of our system. There's a lot of improvements that could be made, but we're grateful for those who are on Medicare. They're grateful for it. Medicaid is a lifeline, a social safety net. The VA system, who serves so many veterans, over 400,000 veterans living in Colorado, not all VA eligible, but over 400,000 veterans. And of course, here in Colorado, the public option will make sense to inject needed competition into the market.
Governor, this is obviously a huge undertaking, and Speaker Becker told me that this is something that will take years to get done. Do you agree?
I think so we're in 2020, obviously. Reinsurance went live this year. The alliance model which is another one of our areas we're focused on saving people money. Healthcare is in Summit County. It will be expanding to 7 counties in 21. The public option, the soonest, would be 22. So that would be the goal if we're able to get everything aligned to be able to get that launched by 2020. But healthcare reform is never. It's not like a one and done deal. There's a lot of work to do to get at those cost drivers, to increase choice. We are excited about expanding the alliance model. This is an alliance that allows consumers across different insurers, public and private, meaning it could be the county employees, it could be a company, as together are able to go as a group and negotiate better rates from providers. So in Summit County, the reinsurance rates led to a premium decrease of roughly 30, 31%, or maybe 35. On top of that, the alliance was another 10 or 15. The net was that Summit County residents save 47%. So that's going to Jackson and Eagle, near Summit, and then Southwest Colorado, La Plata, Dolores, Montezuma, San Juan area, for 21. We're working with our Division of Insurance to support that. But again, the public option will provide more choice in the 22 counties that don't have it. The alliance inherently doesn't provide more choice. It just provides for better leverage and negotiating better rates.
And there is an effort to start a statewide alliance as well. Correct?
Absolutely.
And
we're not stopping there.
Are state employees going to participate in that?
So all of the above. So again, for 21, it's just going to be those 7 or 8 counties. We want to expand it further for 22, 23. Whether that's the whole state or whether we have more counties come online every year remains to be determined. But we're very excited about that imminent expansion. By the way, when you look at reinsurance, alliance, they have their most immediate effect in the areas of the state where they're paying the most. Now, we're all getting ripped off on healthcare, but just so you know, they're paying 50, 60% more in western Colorado and southwestern Colorado than the Front Range and Denver metro area. So that's why when we say 20% average in savings, it might only be 15% in Denver, only 15% in the individual market, but you're still paying less. It's because the savings were greatest, where the costs were greatest. So those are the priority areas for the alliance. And of course, yes, we either want it to be one statewide alliance, certainly a direction we're going, or to have 2 or 3 in kind of a regional alliance that would cover the state.
Is this the sort of public option you're describing, is it the sort of thing that can work well within just one state? Or is this something where we would need to partner with neighboring states?
There's efficiencies of scale in everything. There's some things that we really need national action on, and I would put pharmaceuticals in that bucket. We are trying to find ideas there and working around things, and we're going to try to import prescription drugs. We need federal approval, but even that'll be a limited number of them, and it'll represent some savings, but it won't. A lot of it is tied into our IP laws and the rules around generics and the FDA process. So that bucket is harder for us to get at as a state. We're still pursuing a strong agenda there. But yes, on the insurance option, they have traditionally been more at the state level. While we would like to see a national public option, I think that we can accomplish much of that here in Colorado, as can other states, through a state public option.
Governor, you mentioned the reinsurance program earlier. This is paid for in part by fees on hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
The Hospital Association filed a lawsuit today saying that those fees were imposed too early in an emergency action and called them an illegal end run around Tabor. I'm wondering if you can react to that and whether you're worried that this might throw a wrench in the savings that you just described earlier.
So first of all, look, we love hospitals and we need hospitals, right? Hospitals are great. However, Colorado has the second most profitable hospitals in the country, and they made over $2 billion last year alone from overcharging patients. So we want them to be good, and whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, we want them to be able to meet their payroll, and if they have investors, have a return for all of that. That's what we have in this constellation. And by the way, the nonprofit ones are often just as profitable as the for-profit ones. But the issue is, it shouldn't be on the backs of overcharging patients. So yes, they have a political and a legal strategy to prevent us from the needed reforms that would make some progress in preventing them in overcharging patients.
You seem undeterred.
I think almost anybody here who's been to the hospital in the last year gets it. You saw those bills, even if you didn't pay them, right? So hopefully you have insurance, but you saw what that was. Like, oh my God, how could it be $1,200 for this, right? everybody understands that intellectually because that's what it is. If you've been to a hospital, you've seen it. Again, I hope you're insured and it said paid by insurance on there, but you still saw what that net amount was. So we want all good ideas from the left, the right, the center to help provide a real market that works in healthcare, because we essentially have is a dysfunctional system.
You talked about
From a
prescription.
pricing perspective. It works okay from a quality of care perspective. We're in the middle of the pack, but we spend twice as much for that result as every other industrialized country.
So you talked about prescription drug prices.
Mm-hmm.
How are the talks going with Canada?
Good. The talks are twofold. I mean, there was some initial discussion with the Canadian consulate, but the bigger issue is we're working with the Trump administration to create what the pathway is for approving prescription drug importation. So Florida and Colorado are two states that passed different versions of prescription drug importation from Canada. We are working closely with Secretary Azar. I talked to him 2 weeks ago, most recently, on creating a fast pathway for what that approval might look like to be able to actually begin representing those savings to consumers. So that's actually the harder piece in getting that approval. And then, yes, it'll start small and grow once we get that approval.
Canada has said it doesn't want to save its drugs. It doesn't even have enough drugs for its own people.
Well, again, it won't be every drug all at once, but and this wouldn't work this is a workaround, right? It wouldn't work as a national strategy. We should simply allow for Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug rates and negotiate the same deal in America that Canadians get. There's no reason they should go through Canada. I mean, it's the same. They're made in the same factory, to be clear. These are the same quality. It's the same. They're just literally either shipped to Canada or U.S. or wherever they're made. But Colorado, at the size we are, yes, there are drugs that we can buy from Canada and import here that can represent some savings for people. It's not a national workaround strategy. It's all Colorado can do because we don't control the approval process and we don't control those negotiations.
On the public option, again, are there other states that have attempted similar things to what you're describing?
Several states are looking at it. I think one of the unfortunate aspects of the Affordable Care Act after it went in is there was so much, and there still is, uncertainty around it. In fact, there's lawsuits pending now, that in many ways it froze innovation because people couldn't get too far down that path knowing this could actually go away, and it's still possibly the case that the exchanges and the individual piece could go away. But that has slowed the pace of innovation. It was really, again, what happened, if you recall, is it was passed, and then normally, when there's a bill of that magnitude passed, there's kind of a common sense cleanup bill a year later that would make improvements that are not ideological, but Democrats and Republicans agree on. But for better or worse, I'm sure there's some folks here who didn't like the Affordable Care Act, and that's fine. But I mean, what happened was both sides locked down. And so, unfortunately, many Republicans wanted to sort of, rather than try to improve this or that, they wanted to show that it was a failure. They wanted to show it didn't work. Democrats weren't able to broker those kind of, although there were some supporters on both sides, these kind of common sense things that would have fixed it. So is there still uncertainty? Yes. Are there other states exploring the public option? Absolutely. There's a number of states, along with Colorado, that are looking at exploring these kinds of competitive options.
Okay. We just have a couple more minutes with the governor, so I want to try to get to a couple audience questions, and hopefully we'll keep the answers a little shorter so we can get to multiple ones. Jesse Paul at the Colorado Sun is in the back with a microphone. If you've got a question, raise your hand and he'll find you. Anyone in the audience with a question? Chance to ask the governor anything you want. Favorite color? Which I think you could tell from his sneakers is blue. Let's go in the back here. Introduce yourself and go ahead with the question.
I'm going to stand up. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Emerson, and I work a lot in the mental health field. Can you talk a little bit about the Parity Act and how this is being affected by ACA and what you're proposing?
So one of the things that the Affordable Care Act did is it established mental health parity. How that plays out in the states is a little bit different than that, but certainly people who have health care coverage are in a better position to have their mental health care needs reimbursed than people without coverage. We are working hard on reforming our behavioral health system. So the state spends $1.2 billion a year on behavioral health, and yet it's not what would you say? It's not a person-centric system. And sometimes, in many cases, there's examples of where we're spending too much that doesn't help the patient. I'll just give an example where people are kept in hospital beds when they would be better served and it would be less expensive if there was reimbursement for a step-down facility that would better meet their needs. And it's frustrating to the hospitals, it's frustrating to the patient, the payers pay more. So we assembled a very large task force, 100 people that are working on this. I see Dafna, Michaelson, Jenet is in the room, and she's very involved with behavioral health, on figuring out some recommendations for next June to better align our behavioral health system with the needs of patients. Now, in the meantime, there's a lot of great bipartisan work that the legislature is undertaking to help meet some of those unmet needs in the community.
Well, Jesse finds our next audience question. Sean, you had something you wanted to ask.
I just want to switch a little bit to another topic here. Governor, Republicans held a press conference, said education is going to be their top priority, if not one of their top priorities this year. They rolled out more than a dozen bills, and several of them dealt with merit pay and bonus pay for teachers. Most professions out there pay people based on their skill, right? Not just how long they've been there. Education doesn't. Should the exceptional teachers be paid the same as the ones that mail it in?
So first of all, disclaimer, I have not, there's 25 bills they introduced. I have not looked at those bills. So I can't comment on which. I was just talking to Paul Lundeen about one of them on the way in. At least one of them is his, I suspect more. Yeah, but first of all, I mean, I think that the Republicans deserve praise for presenting their ideas. It's easy when you're in the minority, and I have been in the legislative body, you just say you're against everything, right? Or maybe you agree grudgingly to a few things here or there. That's easy. What is important, and I think what voters really want to see from both parties, in this case the Republican Party, is they want to see what are their ideas, right? What would you do to improve education? We know that all these bills won't make it across the finish line. I probably don't support all of them. The legislature won't support all of them. But here are some ideas around choice, around pay, that are Republican ideas to improve education, which I don't doubt that Republicans and Democrats care about. They all want to improve education, right? They just have different ideas to get there. But it starts with voicing your ideas. And sometimes that means a bill. Sometimes it means giving a 5-minute pitch. Sometimes it means using the soapbox. But I think that Senator Lundeen and Senator Holbert and the Republicans deserve praise for putting ideas out there.
Very good. Another question from the audience? Got one up front here. Or, there we go.
Hi. I'm curious with the changing nature of work and the fact that people in my generation are oftentimes not going to be able to work with the same employer. Your thoughts, both as a policymaker and an entrepreneur, on secure savings accounts and portable 401ks. I know there's talks of that popping up in the legislation. I'm just curious on your opinions and thoughts.
Yeah, this is the kind of basic social compact of the 20th century put a lot on the employer, right? It was like, I work for you for 30 years, you take care of my retirement, you take care of my health care, and I stick with you for my career. It still occurs, by the way. There are still people that, and you have peers that are going to go that model, and that's fine. But more and more, people might have 3 part-time jobs, right? Or switch jobs or even fields every couple of years, or be partially self-employed and pick up some money on a side, gig. So there's all sorts of models. And the question is, in those models, if you are an independent contractor and you derive your income from 3 different sources, what is your retirement and health care look like? How is that provided? Some of that relates to our federal tax code, which is, again, outdated. It still has this employer model. Just an example on health care, right? There's a pre-tax money for health care, employer-based. That's one of the reasons that employer-based system is so locked in. But at the state level, we would love to find ways to have more portability, to encourage savings across different employers, this is, on healthcare at least, this is, again, where the public option and reinsurance come in, because that's that individual and small group marketplace that you're in, and so why that's so important. But if there's going to be an employer share, is there a mechanism where 3 different, pseudo-employers can kick in part of the share, right? So we're very open to those sort of creative options, and that's part of what our future of work effort is going to be geared towards coming up with.
Governor, I think we have time for one more question from Sean.
Governor, this morning, 7 a.m., John and I were both at an audit committee hearing.
You have fun mornings. You guys have so much fun.
Right?
Yeah.
It's real exciting. And see, we're still awake tonight. So at that committee hearing, for the second time in as many months, they took up a request to audit a fund that is in the governor's office that some feel Governor Hickenlooper may have used inappropriately. Once again, the vote came down party line. Democrats opposed to this audit, Republicans in favor of this audit. Where do you come down on this? I'm sure you followed some of the news reports out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a legislative prerogative. Whenever there's an audit, we fully cooperate. So we never request ourselves to audit ourselves, but this is a prerogative of the co-equal branch of government, the legislative branch. They, of course, can audit whatever they want, and we fully respect their right to do that. This particular money that you're very interested in, which obviously I didn't know about and you didn't know about before all this came out, why would we? It originates from when George Bush was president and Bill Owens was governor, and it's my understanding it was a sizable amount of money at the time, $100 and some million. There you go, you know it better than me. So transferred to the state with very little in the way of conditions or guardrails. Basically, this is state money. It has then been mostly spent down. So it's my understanding there's roughly $1 million left, a little bit less than $1 million left in this. But this was something that was set up in the Owens administration, continued on. It was already, we then went through Ritter, Hickenlooper, and then when I became governor, it was down to slightly less than $1 million. So again, we cooperate with any and all audits. It's a prerogative of the legislative branch.
You don't have any opinion, though, given all the questions swirling around this, whether
Well, I
it
mean,
should
look,
be audited or not?
the executive branch is not going to request an audit of themselves. We are happy to comply with any audit. I mean, just like you wouldn't request an audit from any executive agency like the IRS. We are happy to comply with whatever the audit is, and we have audits. We've had many audits. Some, we're dealing with things that were in the prior administration, but we're still working on cleaning those up. And I can just comment generally on the audit process. I think it works well in this state. I mean, we don't agree with all the findings necessarily, but generally speaking, they have helpful findings that provide a path forward for our agencies to implement. They're held accountable for those audit findings. By the way, we have one of the members of my cabinet is in the audience. I want to acknowledge Dr. Angie Piccioni is with us tonight, the Executive Director of the Colorado Commission on Higher Education, Department of Higher Education.
Well, Governor Polis, we want to thank you for attending, for presenting your big idea, and I promise to get you out of here in 30 minutes, so that's what I'm doing.
Thank you.
We look forward to more discussion.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much.
For the second segment of our program, we're going to move a little more rapid fire. We're going to introduce you to 4 different lawmakers who are going to present their big ideas to just 4 different challenges Colorado faces. First, we'll hear from Representative Dafna Michaelson Jenet. She's a Democrat who represents Commerce City, and she'll address the challenge of mental health. Representative?
Okay, let's see. I'm going to put on the timer so that I can stick with my time. Hello, engaged citizens. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We're excited that you're here. And I can't start without recognizing that I am an alum of the University of Denver, Daniels College of Business, and I'm very happy to be home. This man right here stood up and shook my hand when I got my diploma back in 2001. Carrying my baby down the aisle. And here I stand in front of you as a state representative, and I want you to take a little journey with me, if you will. I want you to, for a minute, radically rethink the way that we do medical care in our state. Now, you heard a question. Who asked the question about parity? You heard an excellent question about parity. I promise that I did not pay this woman. But we have a law. That law says that there should be parity between mental health care and physical health care. So let me ask you a question. Imagine you go to your doctor's office and they say, wow, John, we'll just use the name John, sorry. John, I've noticed that your blood pressure is really starting to spike. What do you think about that, John? Well, John probably doesn't know what to think about it much. And then the doctor says, don't worry. When you have a heart attack, give me a call. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our behavioral health care system. It's a joke. Because what we are telling people is, until you are in crisis, we do not care to take care of you. And then we hear that it costs $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion to manage this crisis by crisis system. And we don't know why it's broken? So let's go back to that heart attack example. You show up in the emergency department, heart palpitations, you're sweating, you can't remember what day it is, and then they say to you, well, who's your primary care physician? Well, I don't have a primary care physician. I don't know. I can't remember. Well, maybe it's time for you to find a primary care physician. We'll wait. So you have your heart attack, and now you're supposed to start looking through your insurance books and figuring out who you can go to see. Forget about whether or not you like them. Forget about whether or not you can investigate what kind of care they provide. Forget about whether you care about where they went to school. My 3 minutes are up. You don't have a choice. So what I am going to ask is this year, we pass a bill that requires insurance companies to help you have a 60-minute mental health annual wellness exam. Just like your physical. Because what I can promise you is if you show up in the emergency department in a mental health crisis, that is absolutely the wrong time to be looking for your mental health care provider. Thank you. I have to turn off my buzzer because it's...
There's a lot to unpack there. We've got some questions from our panel, but if you have a question in the audience, raise your hand. Jesse will find you because we're going to get to you soon. Sean, why don't you start?
All right. Dafna knows I think of her as the mental health champion at the state capitol, and we do lots of stories together, including a story on this bill. And I asked you when we did the story, and I ask again, aren't the larger obstacles to people seeking mental health care stigma and the lack of providers?
So those are two entirely different questions. So I'm going to start with the lack of providers, if I may. For a brief period of time, I worked at Denver Health. And what we talked about at Denver Health was the right level of care at the right place at the right time. What I posit to you is that right now we are not utilizing our system well. So in my example, which I would have to talk to you for a lot longer to get to this point of the example, I see social workers as the front line, right? Imagine in this 60-minute annual mental wellness exam, I'm going to give you an example from my personal life. I am recently recovered from cancer. This is a good thing. You can clap now. Thank you. So, you're funny. So recently recovered. So imagine in my cycle of physicals and annual mental wellness exam, I show up to my primary mental health care provider, who happens to be a social worker co-located in my dream world in my doctor's office. And she says to me, it's likely going to be a she, so she says to me, Dafna, I noticed that, you've had cancer in this last year, your blood pressure is up, true story, your cholesterol is up, true story. How are you feeling about this? And let's talk about some of the things you might be able to do about that blood pressure, like not work in the legislature. Okay, not an option. We can talk about medication, that's just fine. But if you're dealing with some depression over your cancer, hey, Dafna, that's normal. Maybe you'd like to have 3 or 4 more sessions during this coming year so we can work that out. So to me, the right level of care is social worker. I'm learning some coping skills. I'm talking about how do we handle the different mechanisms of health. And by the way, the Graduate School of Social work at the University of Denver is phenomenal. Plug, plug, plug. Go GSSW. So there are all sorts of ways to think about that. So now we are seeing social workers. But Dafna had cancer, so she's a little bit more depressed. And maybe she needs a psychologist and a psychiatrist. So now, because we have taken the burden off of psychologists, perhaps of people who don't need to quite yet be at that level of care, we may not see the same type of shortage. Now, your next question is going to be, do we have enough social workers? And the National Association of Social Workers tells me that we do. GSSW is churning them out like butter. And we also have other schools in the state, which we're on DU's campus, so I'm not going to name them, who are also doing a very good job at bringing social workers to market. That's number one. Then you asked me about how do we handle the fact that there is still stigma around mental health? And why shouldn't there be stigma around a medical practice that only treats crisis by crisis? I believe if we start, and my legislative declaration talks about a pregnant woman, we start picking out our mental health care provider at the same time as we pick out our pediatrician before we give birth to that baby, it's normal. When I have the flu, I call the doctor. When I'm feeling blue, I call my social worker. I didn't mean to make a poem, but there you have it.
So do you expect, in pressing for this idea, do you expect pushback from private insurance companies who in many cases should be offering parity in mental health services but very often are not?
They were the very first people I sat down with. And I will tell you how I started my pitch to them. My goal is that I am going to be able to work so well with them that they're going to call the press conference to announce the change that's going to happen that is so significant in our society. And I feel like I'm close.
Very good.
I'm also an eternal optimist. But no, seriously. We've been working very closely. And many insurance companies are already promoting mental wellness. And what I have asked the insurance companies is, if you do the math, if you start calculating the savings, it costs an insurer far more to be treating crisis by crisis than it does to be treating in a preventative manner.
Let's take a question from the audience. Please introduce yourself to the representative and go ahead with your question.
Hi, my name's Kiki. I'm actually a student at GSSW here.
Bravo!
So my question was probably answered in what you just said, so thank you. But the screening is a pretty incredible start to the change in the mental health system. So one, do you believe that we need a total overhaul of our mental health system? And two, do you believe that it's possible?
Yes and yes. But let me back up just a little bit. You asked about screening questions. This is very different than screening questions. Right now, many practices are doing screening questions. I'll give you the story about my son. My son, I talk about him with his permission very often. He attempted suicide when he was 9 years old. So his behavioral health history is storied. So 17 years old, we went for his annual physical. I still go with him. He needs me to hold his hand when he gets the flu shot. Pediatrician hands him the screener. 3 questions. It's not his regular pediatrician. Same practice, different pediatrician. My son hands back the form to the pediatrician. The pediatrician turns ashen gray and says, I think you need to take him to Children's Hospital, to the emergency department for an evaluation. And I said, please read his record. He has dysthymia, a low level of depression. Yes, he circled all the 1s. You're never going to get anything higher than a 1 from him. If we see a 2, that's you and me doing cartwheels. But the pediatrician wasn't prepared to handle that, did not know my child's history, did not know what to do with a child who answered questions in a way that said 1 + 1 + 1 equals, what it equals, and that means suicide. No. Plus, what do we do with those screeners if we have nowhere to take you? So let's give another example. You go for your physical. You're an adult. You are also feeling exceptionally blue. The person who has asked those screener questions is the same person taking your blood pressure and checking your temperature. How are you feeling? Well, I'm a little depressed. Okay. That doesn't work. An annual mental wellness exam with a qualified mental health provider. So that means anyone under our code who is licensed to practice mental health. That's a game changer.
Let's try to get one more audience question with maybe a little shorter.
Shorter answers, yes.
Hi, my name's Jessica. So you talked about right place, right time, right level of service. So Colorado has a lot of rural populations that struggle with mental health issues. And my understanding, I could be wrong, is that there's not a lot of reimbursement authorized by CMS or other government officials or agencies that would support reimbursement doing telemedicine with lower level providers like social workers. So that's a nice solution, but if they can't get paid, how does that bridge the gap?
That's an excellent question, and it is something that we have to work exceptionally hard on. The reimbursement rates for our mental health providers is simply inadequate. And I don't have a short answer for you. I can tell you that we know that it is a problem. It is a problem that we are addressing internally. I'm vice chair of the Public Health Care and Human Services Committee. This is something we talk about all the time. We talk about it in the Joint Health, and actually a number of members of health committees are here today. So this is top of mind for us. I wish that I had this is how we're gonna fix it, rah, rah, let's get behind it. I don't, but I'm aware of it. I do, however, believe telehealth could be an avenue for helping to get out to our rural areas, and the matter of reimbursing at different levels of licensure or license to provide care is something that we're going to address as well.
Very good. Representative Michaelson, Jenet, thank you so much for your help.
Thank you for having me.
We'll look forward to following your idea this session. And next, we'll hear from Senator Paul Lundeen. He's a Republican from Monument, and he's got an idea on how to tackle the challenge of teacher pay. Representative Lundeen, or Senator Lundeen, excuse me.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you very much to the University of Denver, the Colorado Sun, and the unaffiliated, but most importantly, thank you to you folks for all being out here tonight. We appreciate your engagement on these issues. How many of you watched the NCAA National Football Championship game last night? Right. Did you know that the winning coach has been paid $500,000 in bonuses for winning, for being highly effective this last year? That's what we do in America. We reward success. Why? Because we want more success. Did you know that enrollment in Colorado's teacher prep programs have fallen 13% in the last 6 years? And completion, the folks who actually did enroll, has fallen another 17% in that same time frame. Last year, Colorado schools reported a need to hire 8,000 teachers. 1,000 of those positions went unfilled or were filled with long-term temps, substitute teachers. Since 1990, adjusted for inflation, spending on public schools has gone up 20%. And in the same time period, spending on teacher salaries, adjusted for inflation, has gone down 20%. That's a 40% delta, and a statement of tragic misallocation of scarce resources. We should be focused on putting our money where our mouth is. That's in the classroom and in teacher paychecks, the client-facing individuals of public education. We need to send a signal to teachers that they are a priority. And our best teachers, the ones knocking it out of the park, they should be the first ones in line. That's why my proposal does this. It says, let's take $50 million of the almost $14 billion we will spend in Colorado in K-12 public education this year, $50 million, and allocate it to teacher bonuses to those teachers who are identified as most highly effective. Last year, we identified 47% of our teachers as highly effective. It's about half of the teachers getting credit for being highly effective. I came out of business, 7 to 12% were kind of the anticipated criteria for our most highly effective individuals. But if it's 47% of teachers identified as highly effective, by golly, we should be giving them a bonus. They deserve a bonus that would be, based on this piece of legislation that we're offering, about $2,000 apiece. Now, Yesterday, a poll was released, reached out to all Colorado voters and said, what do you think? 73% of Colorado's voters said, good idea. By a show of applause, I ask you, do you think paying highly effective teachers a bonus is a good idea? Can I get a? I'm glad to hear that. Next time it'll be more enthusiastic, hopefully. So Senate Bill 20074, Senate Bill 74, I ask you, please find a way to support it and support your local highly effective teachers. My name's Paul Lundeen, and I paid for this ad.
Senator Lundeen, thank you. Please have a seat. We've got some questions for you. Sean, why don't you start?
So for clarity first, as you were talking about this, so this money is going to, the 50 million is going to come out of current education funding? So you're going to separate this out and say this is just for the highly effective teachers?
So we'll spend about $14 billion, all sources, all in. I'm saying 50 of that really ought to go to the leverage point of getting it into great teachers' paychecks.
So, every year down at the Capitol, we talk about how we're not funding education at the level we're constitutionally required to now. So I think, how do you do this? Take this money out of, a pot of money that already isn't funding education where it's supposed to be. And what happens in a recession? Do you just keep giving the 50 million? Or?
Sure. So what happened is back in 2008, the world reset. Y'all remember the Great Recession? We thought the world had come to an end. And family budgets and small business budgets and big business budgets, they all reset. Well, public education, because it's in the Constitution, because it's in the statute, it's got black letters on white pages and red books that we call the Colorado law that says, no. Regardless of what happened in the real economy, it's supposed to be at this level. And that's a fair request. It's quite frankly in the law, it's in the Constitution, but it's disconnected in a material way from reality. So we've got $14 billion we're gonna spend. I'm simply saying, of that $14 billion, let's just take 50 of it, 50 million, I wish it were 50 billion, 50 million, and put it in a leverage point. Put it where the money should be going, put it where the rubber meets the road, in the pockets of teachers who are the folks providing the service that is so precious, so important. Education to the children, the 900,000 public school children of Colorado, who are the future of our state and our society.
Again, we'll take some audience questions. So if you've got them, I see a few hands up. Jesse Paul will find you.
All right.
This is going to get fun.
I'm going to stand up. This is good.
Real fast first, though. Seth, you had a question.
So, as I understand it, one of the criticisms of this proposal that has come up before is that it essentially it pits some teachers against other teachers without necessarily any benefit going directly to the students. And I'm wondering if we know that Colorado teachers are paid at a fairly low rate compared to teachers across the country, why not simply pay everyone a bit more and attract more teachers that way?
I tell you what, if we could print the money like the federal government prints money, then possibly we could do that. The reality is resources are scarce. It's always a conversation around prioritization. I'm simply saying let's look for a leverage point. Let's, in fact, identify the people, the professionals, because I don't think teachers are factory floor workers. I think they are professionals and should be treated as such, should be respected as such, and quite frankly, should be rewarded as such. Hence this bill.
Question from the audience? I think Jesse's out over here. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Matthew Mengesha. I'm curious, so for teachers who have, if a fifth grade teacher has a class full of students who are at a second grade reading level, and they only get the kids up to a third grade reading level by the end of the year, how do they benefit from this? Are they not highly effective because their students were so far behind in the system?
You bet. That's a great question. Absolutely. So is the measure by which we're identifying highly effective teachers the best possible measure? I don't necessarily agree that it is. But quite frankly, it's the measure that the public policy apparatus settled on 10 years ago. It's been in place, and it's an opportunity for us to provide a leverage point to, in fact, get money in the paychecks of half of the teachers out there. I believe that we should start there and expand from there. That would be the way I'd approach it. Would I improve how we measure? Absolutely. And we do track longitudinal growth over a student's career. If they get a year's growth in a year's time, okay, that's on par. If you get 2 years growth in 2 years' time, or 2 years growth in 1 year's time, I'm guessing that's a highly effective teacher, and we should be sure to reward that teacher. But great question, I appreciate that.
Well, Jesse finds another question. Let me ask you, this issue of teacher effectiveness and the rating scale has been hotly debated for the last 10 years it's been at the
You
Capitol.
bet.
You're saying that you would support amending it, but you don't want to necessarily get rid of it like some in the teaching community.
Yeah, so my perspective is, can it be better? Absolutely. Let's talk about what a better approach would look like. Now, I'll be candid with you. I'm a small business guy, 10 companies over 30 years. And as I said, when we identified our most highly effective individuals, 7 to 12% is kind of the percentage that we were anticipating. So it would be a tough scale. Maybe we could grade a scale. Maybe it could be highly effective, bonus 1, almost as highly effective, bonus 2, et cetera. But the point is, let's start rewarding excellence, because that's what we want in our classrooms, is more excellence. And they're out there. There are rock stars in our classrooms, and we need to be rewarding them.
Very good. Another question from the audience over here again.
Hi, my name's Ashley. I'm
Ashley.
just wondering, so when you're saying effective, we're judging by standardized testing?
There's a number of measures. It's far too complicated. Part of the reason, in my perspective, that it is far too complicated, it's a public policy conversation. The teachers union said, no, can't do that, got to add all these things. Other folks, the reformers, said, yeah, but let's make sure we get at these things. So at the end of the day, you get a rubric, a method of analyzing and evaluating that's kind of like a horse designed by a committee. It ends up looking like a camel. And that's what we've got. So the reality is, can we do better? Should we do better? Absolutely. But again, I come back to the fact it's settled public policy at this point. It's a method of identifying our highly effective teachers. Let's reward them.
One more quick question, Jesse. I think we got a couple here in the front, if you don't mind.
We could stay all night, couldn't we?
Hi, my name is Ariana. I'm a student here at DU.
Hi, Ariana.
So I agree, and I think that it's a great measure or a great way to, reward teachers. However, I think like the rest of the questions, the effectiveness is something that's in question. So given the audience and our reaction to that, would you go back to Congress and try to think about those effectiveness measures? Because I think that you have to do that before you do the latter.
So several answers. One, would I go back to Congress? Heck no, I'm staying here in Colorado. I like the General Assembly. I think working at the state level is where we can be most effective. So difference between federal, Congress, and, okay, fair enough. Do I think we need to provide a better evaluation system? Absolutely. Let's work on it. Let's think about it. Let's make it more precise. And I really like the idea of tracking student growth. I think that is a measure we have and we should be using. Because if somebody shows up seriously remedial in need and you drive them forward or help them find their way forward in a meaningful way, you should be rewarded for that. But I refuse to give up on the teachers out there who are already demonstrating by whatever measure, it's the settled measure today. Why aren't we rewarding them for that? They're doing a great job. Let's say we appreciate that. It's not the $500,000 they give to a football coach, but it's something that's meaningful. Let's change the culture by getting a reward in the paychecks of teachers who are doing a great job. We'll be here all night.
Yep,
but I think they're going to take my mic away from me.
Senator Lundeen, thank you for your time. We
John,
could
thank
talk
you.
all night. This is an interesting
John,
one,
thank
and
you.
we'll be covering
Thanks so
it
much.
all session long. Thank you, sir. Next, we'll hear from Senator Jack Tate. He's a Republican from Centennial, and he's going to talk to us about his ideas to address college debt. Senator Tate, a couple minutes.
Thank you. Am I on right now? And when I came in here, I kind of thought maybe I was at the wrong event. This is the Big Ideas event, and I just have a small idea for a big problem, so hopefully it's okay today. And I also understand, John, why you're reluctant to invite me here, because after all, after I hear Dafna and Paul talk, I'm nowhere near their level of oratory, so I'm going to do my best.
It's mostly because you're a Duke fan, actually. Go Heels.
Yeah, I see it, Heels. Well, so student debt, we all know that's a big problem, and that's young workers are stifled by their debt, are not able to move on in their next phase of life, whether it be investing in a home or getting the kind of job they want. Maybe they're stuck in jobs that help their cash flow situation. And something I really take seriously is getting people invested for the long term. And I remember when Bernie Sanders came and did his rally this summer, he was talking about like loan forgiveness. And a member of the governor's administration was outside with me, and she confided in me saying she didn't really go for that plan. She had actually taken off a year in college to work, had worked during college, and she just didn't like the lack of fairness of having some people having their debts forgiven when she'd made different choices. And so that's kind of an issue. I don't know if we'll ever resolve that, but I was trying to think, what can we do that has a veneer of fairness that would chip away at it? And I was thinking, how about all the tuition reimbursement programs companies offer their workers for current and new education? What if we reframe the problem as tuition reimbursement, but now have a program or some type of incentive where companies can expand their offering of tuition reimbursement and make it not just current and future education expenses, but also past education expenses. And that way, maybe the state of Colorado can get involved in incentivizing companies to expand their benefits, help their attraction and retention of employees, and then importantly, if we're involved with some tax credits, then those tax credits be matched against larger cash flows to attack the student debt problem. So for example, if we were to say, and this is no knock on my friend Senator Fenberg's idea, but he has an idea to just provide student loan relief where the state's making payments. And I can't really talk about the demerits or merits of that option, except that it's a one-to-one payment. We're making a payment for the student. But if we somehow take a tuition reimbursement program, make it for student debt, maybe we can take $1.50 from the state, and it goes along with $5 from a company toward that person's overall debt total. And so that's my idea. Well, where does the tax credit come in? Why do we need a tax credit? Well, simply the IRS does not tax tuition reimbursement for new current and future education expenses. The IRS, however, would tax a company making student loan payments for one of their employees up to that $5,000 mark that we all know is part of what a tuition reimbursement program is capped at. So that means if a company pays $5,000 for a student, there's a tax bill that a student probably can't afford if they can barely afford to make their student loan payments. That's where the tax credit comes in. My idea is to have the state government, through a tax credit, offset the tax liability a student would have associated with their company providing tuition reimbursement for their past education expenses. Now, ultimately, it's like I said, a small idea for a big problem, but I think it would help our businesses, help training, help align skills with what companies in Colorado are looking for. So that's my idea. Happy to be taken to the wolves over here to my left.
Senator Tate, thank you. Please join us. Just for a quick reference, you mentioned Senator Fenberg's bill. That's Steve Fenberg, the Democratic Majority Leader in the state Senate, who's got this bill. I think Sean might ask you about it. It's also a bill Governor Polis endorsed, in fact, in his State of the State. Sean?
Well, I already gave a proviso. I can't comment on the demerits or merits of that bill. So.
So you touched on this in the talk that you just gave. Is it government's role to help students pay their debt? Because this will involve government tax credits. And why just focus on the debt? Why not focus on the cost of higher ed?
Well, yes, we should be focusing on the cost, and that has to do with like easy money and overhead at college, as well as how colleges want to compete not on value but on service-scape. That's a marketing term for the marketing folks out here, but that's a different problem. The reality is people have the debt. As I said, the debt's not going away while we're solving the college cost problem for other people. And certainly there are purists out there who don't want tax expenditures of any kind and get into the weeds of what government should or should not do. But if we're offering tax credits for electric vehicles and tax credits for this, that, and the other, and why not just use tax incentives to help young workers and have businesses participate in that. So maybe I just like the idea and I'm not too worried about like some tax religion.
It sounds like you do come down in the political middle here, maybe not so far as the Democratic idea of paying back student debt. But more to the middle than some of your Republican colleagues who certainly don't like any of these, what they call tax expenditures or tax breaks for special interests?
I don't know, I just like the idea because of mine, John.
I'm sure there's a few in the audience with questions about student debt. We'll get to them right after.
One thing though, it's not so much a political thing, just for me is the idea, like if we, a lot of times in the legislature, we think about tax expenditures as incentives. And the idea is you're trying to get something else to happen at the same time. A marginal capital investment happen, some change in behavior that has maybe a feedback loop of cost savings for the capital. I know the representative in mental health, I don't know if she said that, but I'm sure there's a cost benefit analysis associated with treating mental health early and often. That way we don't have cost exposure and problems elsewhere. So I just like the idea, and I hope you guys judge me fairly, because if companies are paying $4 to $5 towards their students' debt, that's good news.
Very good. Seth?
In your comments, you were sort of addressing the question of instead of paying people directly to pay down their debts, you would incentivize companies to do it, and that there might be kind of a multiplier effect.
That's right.
That they would pay more. I mean, do we have, I'm just curious, is there evidence that they'll do that? Do we have evidence from either previous legislation here or from other states that that companies will take that on?
No, hasn't been tried before. But there is, there's legislation in Washington that's being proposed right now, I think this fall, to create that fairness or parity of new and old education expenses, and we'll see if that happens or not. And then if that does happen in Washington, then any costs associated with this program will be then relieved.
Very good. Jesse, anyone with questions? Right here in the front.
Hi, my name is Don, and I have a question about how this would actually work in the sense that how would you ensure that a prospective employee who comes to a company with student debt is just as attractive as one without student debt? Would you make it illegal for a company to ask if an employee has student debt?
No. Remember, it's not a compulsory program. Companies here in Colorado or nationwide vary in their offering of tuition reimbursement programs to their employees. And imagine, I'm just thinking out loud, imagine maybe companies that have more of a technology orientation or something special that needs specialized skills might be more inclined to have current tuition reimbursement programs. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the company doesn't have to provide the benefit. And my sense is you'll see just a variety in how much that's embraced.
Do we have another question, Jesse?
Yeah, my name is Christy. I'm with the Early Childhood Education Association for Colorado. I want to say first, I think that this is a fantastic idea. In the early childhood field, I represent small businesses, private child care centers that care for our youngest learners from infancy all the way up until they hit kindergarten, and sometimes a little bit beyond, let's be honest. And so I think that being able to retrospectively pay off some of these student loans, you're more likely to incentivize people getting into fields that it's expensive to get the degree and it's hard to pay it off afterwards. But with credentials getting higher and higher, it's really becoming a necessity, not just for the looks of what it shows, but really for ensuring the best education for our youngest citizens. My question, though, is when looking at the broader education spectrum and really people who work for the state, how would state employees and people who are publicly funded be able to access this kind of benefit, or would it kind of deter people from going into the public sector?
Well, right now, as I said, companies here in Colorado, organizations have tuition reimbursement programs now to some varying degree. Some do, some don't. And ultimately, employment decisions are based on a multitude of factors. My idea is, and that's why I called it a small idea, it's not to tackle the entirety of the problem. At the end of the day, a tuition reimbursement program, prospectively or retrospectively, is going to make sense for some organizations and not for some others. Some organizations may want to offer a different benefit package.
We got one more quick question, I think, in the back.
My name is Melissa, and I'm an attorney. My husband is also an attorney, and between the two of us, we have over $300,000 in law school and undergraduate debt. I think that if Colorado values the education of its citizens, then absolutely we need to invest government dollars in helping people achieve higher education goals so that they can contribute to Colorado. I am a government lawyer. I am a government lawyer because I am eligible for federal loan forgiveness, and I signed up for that when I was in law school and decided to pursue public interest work and serve our state. It would be incredibly important for bipartisan efforts to do more than just look at the private sector as a way to incentivize work and education and its affordability. I agree with the person who spoke before me. If you just look at the private sector, you miss out on having talent in the government, which Colorado needs.
The question there, if I can repeat it for those who didn't hear, it sounds like more interest in including the public sector in your bill. Is that something you'd be willing to look at?
I guess I wish I was a state employee that, if such, that I knew if we had a tuition reimbursement program with the state of Colorado or not right now.
I'm not sure we do, based on what she was saying. Okay. Yeah, maybe at the federal level.
I think she's talking about even, serving in the public sector.
Oh, sure.
She's an attorney, right? And so I don't know if she's defense or prosecutor, but they make a whole heck of a lot less than somebody who works in the private sector.
That's really the idea. I shouldn't have qualified it so much as being the private sector only. If you think about any organization making payments on your behalf, that counts as discretionary income and probably other income on your W-2, and that is taxable. So it doesn't really matter who the entity is, private or public. At the end of the day, if you have that benefit, it's taxable income, you have a tax event, and if you're in one of the smaller two tax brackets, you'll get a tax bill of either $650 or $1,155, depending on where you are.
Very good. Senator Tate, thank you so much for
Thank
pitching
you.
your idea. We appreciate it. We'll follow
Appreciate
it.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Last but not least, I want to introduce you to Representative Yadira Caraveo. She's a Democrat from Thornton and a pediatrician, and she wants to talk to you about teen vaping. Representative?
Well, thank you all for being here this evening and for being such an engaged audience with really some incredible questions that I look forward to. So when I'm not in the legislature, this is actually only my second session, I'm a pediatrician. In fact, I still see patients on the weekends. One weekend a month, I'm in clinic. And so something that we have seen as healthcare workers over the last couple of years, but particularly since the end of last session, is a vaping epidemic that has led to almost 60 deaths and about 2,900 hospitalizations. So as a pediatrician who has the honor of being in the state legislature, my idea is to institute a flavor ban on vaped products. To some of you, maybe, thank you. So we are at epidemic levels in Colorado. We are #1 in the nation for teen vaping. In fact, 1 in 4 young people in Colorado are vaping currently. So for those of you who have children or grandchildren and you think this is somebody else's problem, this isn't something that's going to affect my family, it's going to affect it. Teenagers, talk to me every single day about private things in clinic. And it occurred to me that, from the time that I went to middle school and then to medical school, we as a healthcare sector, as a public health sector, as a public, have done an incredible job of decreasing the rates of smoking. And vaping has unfortunately done away all of those gains. So a couple of years ago, when this was really coming to a head, I realized I was, as a doctor, doing a really great job of asking kids about smoking in their households, but not a great job about vaping. So the first kid that I decided to try this with was an 11-year-old. And I did the typical, does anybody smoke around you in your home? And she said, oh God, no, nobody smokes around me. And it occurred to me, I need to start asking this vaping question. So I said, hon, does anybody vape around you? And she goes, well, no, not at home, but everybody in my class does. The teachers had no idea. There are, I ran a nicotine tax last year that was unfortunately not successful, but got to learn a lot about these devices. There are hoodies where the elastic is actually a vape device. There are inhalers. It looks just like an inhaler, and it's actually a vaping device. And actually, 2 weeks ago, when I was talking to members of my school board in Adams County and talking about the idea that I had, the big idea that I had, they told me, oh gosh, an 11-year-old, that's really cute. We had a kindergartner last week who brought in the vaping device that their teenage brother had brought into the home, and they were sitting there in class just puffing away on it. 15,000 flavors have been introduced. That's just in 2017. And so these are devices that have clearly been marketed towards young people. Some of the flavors I looked up today are Vape the Rainbow, Candy King, my favorite, Unicorn Barf. These are not being marketed to me or to you. The tobacco industry decided that because of the work that we had done over the last several decades, they needed a new generation of people addicted to nicotine. And so while the Trump administration didn't quite go far enough and decided only to ban flavors in pods and left the market open in terms of vape shops and tank devices, I think that in Colorado we can go a little bit further to protect the young people that I see in clinic every single day and ban these flavors outright. So that is my big idea, one that I hope will benefit the kids that I see in clinic every day, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. Thank you. Sean? As a mother of teens, I let you start.
And as much as I get the stuff that you're saying, I gotta wonder though, if you ban it here in Colorado, won't they just go across to Wyoming, order on the internet, something like that? Will this make a difference?
And that's always a possibility with anything that we try to restrict. I think that the momentum is building. I can tell you that in clinic every day when I speak to mothers like you, this is something that parents are learning more and more about. And a 16-year-old, while they may be able to drive around Denver, I'm not sure that they're, well, with tracking devices that parents have on phones now, we'll see if they can get to Wyoming. But I think that at least as a state, we really need to look at this. There was a 15-year-old that died last week. Youngest patient so far, 54% of people who are vaping are under the age of 24. And so this is really something that we need to target to the youth in Colorado.
So I guess related to Sean's question.
Another father of a teen.
Another father of a teen. If these devices are that easy to conceal, is there, in addition to a ban you may be talking about, is there an effort, or are you considering efforts to train educators in how to spot these things, or train people how to get them out of the schools?
I think just like pediatricians are learning every day from every patient, teachers are learning every day from every student. And that's something that we'll continue to learn. I mean, there's always going to be a new device or a new way of consuming that hopefully we don't have to keep, chasing our tail around. But really the flavors are what really get to young people. About 90% of kids start vaping on a flavored product, and there was a survey that the FDA did a couple of years ago now, so before this really peaked, where 70% of 12 to 17-year-olds say, I vape because I like the flavors. And so we're going to be chasing perhaps devices, but the flavors are really what's getting them started.
I want to take audience questions again, but I have a quick one. Find Jesse's in the back. Raise your hand if you've got any question about teen vaping. You referenced this when you spoke a moment ago. The big tobacco lobby did their job. They did. Lobbied heavily against your nicotine tax bill that's supported by Governor Polis last session. What's to say the same result's not going to happen this time, that they helped defeat that bill again? How confident are you that this will get through?
Oh, John, they lobbied heavily. We unfortunately brought this in the last 10 days of the legislature because of negotiations that we had around how the money was going to be spent, and they flew in 100 lobbyists from out of state. The Capitol was swarming with them. They're going to put up a fight. I'm a doctor. I'm used to, fighting things like big tobacco. I'm happy to do it as a legislator, however many times I have to.
Very good.
So I had a quick question. A lot of teenagers have started turning to this smokeless tobacco, the little packets that are also flavored. Does this cover something like that?
That's a great question. So this bill is at its very nascent stages. We are doing a few things around tobacco this year. We did a few things last year, and there was much debate up until really last week as to whether this was going to be in with the Tobacco 21 measure that's
Raising
being taken.
the age,
Yes,
yeah.
raising the age up to 21, which the Trump administration has done, and we're going to be doing at the state level as well. And so I think it's still up for debate exactly what things are going to be included in the product lines.
Did we have a question, Jesse?
Hi, my name is Piper. I was wondering, there's a lot of reports that a lot of the deaths or illnesses due to teenage vaping have been coming from bootleg or homemade vaping products. And my two questions are, how much truth is to that report? And then B, if there is a fair amount of truth to this, what will you plan on doing to combat pushing these products more underground and making them less regulated, which end up being more dangerous?
Absolutely, and yes, I think the investigations are still underway, but what the CDC says, where I get updates every week, is that it's a lot of them can be attributed to bootlegged products. That is also products that we're going to have to continue to be cognizant of, but basically if there is a flavor ban, we will know that anything that is marketed, that is sold, that has a flavor, is a bootlegged product, because major manufacturers will not be allowed to sell them in Colorado.
We might have time for one more audience question, but first, Sean, you had something?
Governor Polis has been reluctant to go this far on teen vaping, as you know. How big of an obstacle is that, and are you working to persuade him?
I've had initial conversations with his office. What I got in terms of feedback from them is that the flavor ban is a whole they are not opposed to. It's really details about which products are going to be included, particularly around menthol and cigarettes, which I think we also need to address. But he seems open to at least the discussion.
Very good. We've got time for one more question.
Hi, so vaping products were originally intended for people coming off of cigarettes. So my specific question was, this is focused toward teen vapors, but what flavors do we allow for the people coming off of cigarettes using these vaping products? What flavors are you allowing through? Is it strictly tobacco, or are you allowing, I don't know, that would be my question.
Yes, and I think that's still in negotiations. My goal as a pediatrician would be no flavors. Now, these products were marketed as tobacco cessation products. The FDA has never said that they're actually tobacco cessation products. That is what the industry has said. We all know that cigarettes are bad for you. Try this new product. It's going to be great. Well, 2,900 deaths later, I think we can assess not that great. And so as a medical professional that I'm trying to translate into legislature, I would say tobacco is the only flavor.
Very good. Representative Caraveo, we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Our lawmakers have been overly gracious with their time, and they're still sitting there. So if you have more questions, I bet you can grab them. On behalf of my fellow panelists, Sean Boyd at CBS 4 and Seth Maskett at the Center on American Politics, I want to thank you for being engaged and attending. A special thank you to our Colorado Sun members. Your membership enables conversations like this and quality local journalism on a daily basis. I hope you'll consider becoming a member if you're not one, and we've got some folks in the back who can help you sign up. Thanks again to Governor Polis and our state lawmakers who joined us, as well as the University of Denver, our amazing host for tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Good night.